Hey everybody, it's Rachel Hauk here, and I just want to say thank you for reading the Wedding Chapel. I can talk. Let me make sure my volume is all the way up. Okay. Thank you for reading the Wedding Chapel. It means a lot to me that you guys are doing it for your book club. I hope that you guys have enjoyed reading it, and you're going to have some good discussion about the characters, Jimmy and Colette and Jack and Taylor, after you watch this video. A little bit about the book. And I don't want to make this too long because it can get really boring, me just droning on and on about the book. So I got the idea when I was in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. I was on vacation with my husband, and I was driving from our cabin down into Gatlinburg to make a call with my publisher because we didn't have cell signal up in our cabin. And while I was driving down, I knew she was going to ask me, what do you want to write next? And I had just completed the Royal Wedding series, and they were thinking, okay, we think we want to put a pin in this for now, and let's take you on to something else. What else you got? And I really had nothing. I just, had exhausted all of my energy on How to Catch a Prince and the Royal books before. So I drove by this little quaint chapel up on a hill, and among all of these trees and shrubberies. It was just beautiful. And there was a sign that said Chapel in the Glen. And I just thought, how about the Wedding Chapel? And so I get down to call her. I'm sitting in a McDonald's parking lot, and I said, how about the Wedding Chapel? And she said, done! We love it! Do it! By the time I got back up to my cabin, I had an email from her and the whole team saying, we love this. We want you to write this book. We don't even know what this book is about. I don't even know what this book is about. So that's when I got busy, started thinking about what would the story of a wedding chapel be. Now, when you are writing a book where an object is part of the story and actually a character in the story, you have to think about how that object, the wedding chapel, the wedding dress, impacts the characters. And I had experience with the wedding dress, so I thought I could figure it out for the wedding chapel. And what I really wanted to do was do something unique. And I thought at first I was going to have all of these stories of all of these weddings that took place in the chapel. Then I thought, well, that's what we would expect, right? What about a wedding chapel in which there have been no weddings? And so that's how I started that idea. And I always wanted to do something post-World War II. And so I just kind of stopped at that timeline and figured out what's going on in the world. And bringing Colette and Peg over from England, having been war orphans, just seemed like a great way to create some dynamic and some tension between them. And that's how the story got started. Then with Jack and Taylor, I think they just emerged from the same kind of source as thinking, what can I do that's a little different than I haven't done before? You always think that. And then what kind of story do I want to tell that revolves around a wedding chapel? And having them have elope before they even discover the chapel means that they're going to have to re-examine their marriage. So then I started digging into how they eloped and their background, and just started figuring out what kind of flaws that they have. So always when I start a character, I always ask, what's the wound of their past? So not everyone has a wound of their past that's monumental, that makes them walk around with a little bit of a limp in life, an emotional limp perhaps. So I always try to figure out what kind of emotional limp could this wound have given the character. From that wound, usually a lie is formed. So for example, with Taylor, she thought she saw her dad kissing another woman. And so that forms a lie that my dad is not trustworthy. My dad is a womanizer. My dad cheated on my mom. How can I trust men? And everyone in her family is been divorced. They divorced well, I think was what she said. And so out of that comes a fear. Now I have a fear of commitment. Now I have a fear of true love. Will love last for me? So that's kind of how I look at each character and develop each character. And that's what I did with Jack and Taylor, Jimmy and Colette. So that's how they formed on the page. What other cool things about this book? Oh, it's written in 2 timelines, as you well know, and we call that a slip time novel, meaning that we're going to pass back and forth through time and take a look at these different characters at different stages. The reason why I like to write slip time novel is I love kind of looking at the past and seeing how it impacts the future. Wouldn't you guys love it if you could somehow time travel back to your grandparents or an aunt and uncle or your parents even, some place in time, and look at how they address life issues, how they communicate, their thought processes, like what was going on in their life that led me to who I am in 2016. So that's why I like to write those kind of novels. I want to look at what Jimmy and Colette, how their foundation started, impacted Jack and Taylor. So that's why I love the Slip Time novels. As you know, there's a lot of angst between Peg and Colette. I've had some people who just utterly hate Peg. And that's okay. Peg's a little bit of a villain. But it's a look at what happens when we let bitterness resonate in our lives, and jealousy, and fear. So I really believe that for Peg, the fear that entered her because of the war, and justifiably, turned into bitterness and anger and jealousy. And Colette ended up just going a different route. She was open to love. And I think that's where we have to ask ourselves, Lord, where that wound is and where that bitterness is, or that hurt. If I'm bitter about something, or I'm always defensive about something, is there a wound? And all you do is ask him to heal it. So I think there's a little bit of inner healing that happens in every novel, at least for the characters, and sometimes for me. One of the things that I learned when I was writing How to Catch a Prince, which is the third in the Royal Wedding series, was that I had to leave space for the reader to enter the story. I ran into a physical issue while I was writing that book, and I tell you guys, I didn't know if it was going to get done, and it was the first time ever I had to call my publisher and say, I can't do it. It's not done. And I actually turned it in on time. It just didn't have an ending, and the last 100 pages were, really messed up. And they said, well, we'll work with it, but I was in a place where I couldn't keep with my original timeline. So we had to postpone it for 3 months. And the Lord really met me. I got it done. But still, the final product felt like there were cracks in the story, because there were cracks in me as I wrote it. And I am here to say that the Lord totally healed me and delivered me, and I got through my physical issue. So yay, God. But I said to myself, this is where you've learned that sometimes there's places in the story that aren't perfect, and that's where the Holy Spirit can speak to the reader. I love that novels are an entertainment form in which the reader can actually insert themselves into the story. There's room in there for your own imagination and for your own thoughts. I try not to over-describe a character, because I want the reader to be able to picture Jack or Taylor how they want to picture them. So yeah, that's kind of how I approach writing a story. I had one reader tell me she thought it was a kind of a bittersweet story, and I said, oh really? And she said, well yeah, because in the end Jimmy and Colette got together, but they had all that time in between. I've always been fascinated by those kind of stories where people were in love in high school and then they go off and live their lives, and then they meet at a high school reunion 20, 30 years later or 50 years later, and they fall in love again. I always think those are fascinating stories. I don't think it makes the life in between, and most people get married and have children. Jimmy and Colette just didn't. I don't think that makes the life in between invalid. I just think it means that sometimes true love takes a while to show up. So that's not always pleasant, is it? So if there are any single ladies watching this, it's not for you. True love will show up soon. Anyway, I wish that I knew what your questions were. You guys can always write me at rachelhauk@gmail.com if you have questions. I'd love to hear from you. But that was kind of the inspiration for the story. I think I wanted to show that it's really never too late for true love, and kind of take a look at how bitterness and resentment really can mess up our lives. And even though Peg was apologetic in the end, it really was too late, and she should have done it while she was alive. And I also love that looking at Jack and hearing, even though he had this horrendous childhood and this awful relationship with his biological father, that God provided a father for him. And that even if God hasn't provided a father for us, He's our Father. He's an amazing Father, and He's the best Father we could ever have. And so it's really looking at not letting our wounds and our fears keep us from the living God, and not letting us walk in His goodness. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the story. I'm at 10 minutes now, so I don't want to bore you anymore. So thank you so much for reading it, and I appreciate you guys so much. Be sure to shoot me an email or stop by my Facebook page. I'd love to hear from you. Have a great day, and God bless you.